When a society is faced with terrorist attacks, human and social sciences are sometimes criticized for being useless in preventing them or complacent or indulgent with terrorists. One remembers, for instance, that the Prime Minister of the time, Manuel Valls, complained that the explanation provided by social sciences to make sense of these situations were providing excuses to the perpetrators of senseless acts. Another example would be the recent polemic in France about Islamo-leftism in French universities. But what we are demonstrating in this book, which brings together the works of social scientists from different disciplinary backgrounds, is that academic research is a source of knowledge that allows society to make sense of what is happening to individuals and collectives in times of crisis, to engage with the difficult emotions, and thus to find ways to respond to the challenges that arise with resilience and reflexivity. So the objective of the book is to contribute to the learning and healing processes that will take society, here French society, behind the shock and horror of the events themselves and help renew the collective bonds. The expertise that we bring together here, for instance, help us understand that terrorist attacks are moments of social effervescence that create the condition for a certain degree of hysteria in social life. In other words, every single one of us is challenged into taking sides. Again, a symptom can be found in the accusation directed at social scientists. This is all the more striking as these academic disciplines are precisely useful to develop approaches that are reflective and self-reflective. Social sciences draw lessons from empirical studies, and their conclusions sometimes challenge taken for granted notions or prejudices. One example would be the idea that individuals who are confronted with a situation of imminent lethal risk, such as terrorist attack, are struck with panic and are driven to act irrationally and selfishly. Another example would be that Islamic terrorism automatically reinforces ethnic and social prejudice and therefore benefits the extreme right. Many people think so, but it is in fact much more complex than this.
The 2015 attacks were specific in many ways, and in particular in terms of the targets, the number of victims, and the repetition of attacks. The targets are important, first of all. As is often the case for terrorist attacks, they were selected for the symbolic message the attack would be able to convey. In January, the targets were famous journalists working for a satirical weekly magazine. Over the past 50 years, Charlie Hebdo had attracted a lot of attention for its many provocations, including the republication of cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, originally published in Denmark. The other targets were members of the police force and shoppers in a kosher supermarket. The interpretative framework that was immediately articulated by the public authorities and relayed by the media was that it was an attack on the Republic, on the state, and on the French nation. In November, the targets were random people in Paris and in the suburb, and places people could easily recognize and imagine going to: a concert hall, a football stadium, restaurants, and bars. The frame of interpretation that was promoted was one of an attack on the French society in its entirety. The second shock is linked to the very high number of victims and who they were. 17 were killed in January and 130 people in November, with many more people wounded. There were also simultaneous attacks in Paris and around Paris. Thirdly, even if the January and November attacks are those that people remember most, they turned out to be part of a series, and repetitions hit other parts of France, aiming at ordinary citizens, at places of everyday activities, including churches, private homes, and streets. Families and children were also victims in the attacks, for instance, against Nice on the 14th of July 2016. The repetition created a climate of fear and concernment, which itself impacted French people. This triple singularity of the attacks led to a highly unusual academic research project, and the results of some of them are gathered in this book.
Attacks such as those of 2015 are total social facts that have far-reaching implications through all domains of social life. The strength of a collective book such as this one is that it brings together, in a concise yet detailed fashion, the results of the diverse research projects conducted since 2015 in different social scientific disciplines and with a great diversity of approaches. What the book does is that it seeks to understand and to explain the effects of these attacks on French society and the responses that they triggered at different levels of society. The book, published by the French University Press, the PUF, in November 2020, contains 6 chapters, but a new updated and expanded version will be published in 2021 by Palgrave with 2 more contributions. The book thus includes a chapter looking at how people at the Bataclan reacted to the attack, and one analyzing the multiplication of street memorials set up by citizens in city square across Paris and around the country after the attacks. The chapters, 2 chapters explore the world of media and communication through the angle of the adaptation and regulation of TV coverage of terrorism, and through the emergences of counterpublics created by social media. And in the English edition, there is also.
First, they challenge the idea that Islamic terrorist attacks may have an automatic impact on public support for the executive. Second, they undermine the idea that racial prejudice and intolerance between communities are necessarily increased by terrorist attacks, because political capital can be made from amalgamating terrorists with the general Muslim population. In the months that followed January 2015, and to a lesser extent after November, the French executive benefited from a rise in public support, which was documented in opinion surveys, but also in the press and in the political arena. The political science literature talks about a rally around the flag and of a patriotic reflex. However, in the chapter I co-authored with Laurie Boussaguet, who is an associate researcher at the CE, we highlight the symbolic work that was developed by the President, the Prime Minister, the Interior Minister and their teams to build the country's resilience and also to prevent centrifugal tendencies. We also demonstrate that symbolic public action was prepared carefully and consciously and intended to prevent potential outbursts of violence. Indeed, one could think that Islamic terrorism contributes to increased support for the extreme right, and that it contributes to feed xenophobic and authoritarian sentiments in the population. But what Vincent Tibéry argues is that the survey data collected over several years on attitudes towards minorities shows a decidedly more complex picture. In fact, tolerance has increased regularly over several years, and the period 2015-2016 is no different. One possible explanation for such an evolution in public attitudes towards ethnic and religious minorities lies in the performative dimension of political discourse. The framing of events that was proposed by the state, particularly after January, may well have contributed to such an evolution.